I'm in my house. I'm shooting. Who's shooting? Oh, how many times did you hear shooting?
25-year-old Angela Kramer, her voice trembling as she crouched in her bedroom closet, phone pressed to her ear. Outside the world she had always known, the home where she had grown up, the family she loved, was being torn apart by gunfire. Her heart pounded. She could hear footsteps, deliberate and methodical, moving through the house. Somewhere, her parents were screaming. Somewhere, her younger brother Michael was crying out in pain. And she could do nothing but pray that she survived. This was not a random attack, not a robbery gone wrong. This was personal. And as the dust settled, investigators would face a baffling truth. The person behind this nightmare had a solid alibi, a perfect one. Who, then, could have orchestrated such horror, and why? The Kramers were a family of 3 children and 2 devoted parents, living the quiet suburban dream in Darien, Illinois, a small town just 25 miles southwest of Chicago. With a population of 22,000, Darien was a place of tree-lined streets, well-kept homes, strong schools, and neighbors who waved when they passed. It was the kind of town where violent crime felt like something that happened elsewhere, in big cities, not here. And the Kramer family fit the ideal mold. Jeffrey Kramer, 50, had built his life from nothing, owning and operating Kramer's Towing, a business he ran with tireless dedication. Known for his work ethic and kindness, Jeffrey was a man who helped neighbors without hesitation. His wife, Lorie, 51, worked as an editor at McGraw-Hill, meticulous, organized, and completely devoted to her children. By March of 2010, the Kramer household seemed like the very definition of suburban normalcy, a family whose life appeared predictable, safe, and uneventful. Jeffrey and Lorie Kramer had spent 30 years building a marriage rooted in routine, devotion, and love. Neighbors might have described them as the kind of couple who held the neighborhood together in quiet ways, waving to familiar faces, attending local events, and offering help to anyone in need. Their children fit seamlessly into this tableau of suburban peace. Anthony, at 29, carried himself with the calm authority of someone who had learned responsibility early in life. Reliable, thoughtful, and protective of his younger siblings, he was the kind of son any parent could trust implicitly. Angela, 25, was recovering from a recent breakup, navigating the fragile aftermath of lost love while retreating to the safety of the home that had shaped her childhood. Her presence at the family house was both a comfort and a reminder of the bonds she still clung to, seeking refuge from the chaos of adult life. Michael, the youngest at just 20, carried a different kind of energy. Freshly enrolled at the Universal Technical Institute, he was brimming with ambition, eager to follow in his father's footsteps and forge a path in a skilled trade. He was the embodiment of youthful optimism, enthusiastic, hardworking, and full of dreams yet to be realized. But appearances can deceive. Beneath the surface, a darkness had been creeping closer, silent, patient, and meticulously plotting. Someone had been watching, waiting, and scheming for months. The Kramers were completely unaware that their lives were about to be destroyed in a single night of unimaginable horror. On the night of March 1st, 2010, the house was deceptively quiet. Michael slept on the living room couch because his bed had been claimed by his girlfriend. Anthony kept to the basement, immersed in his own world, and Jeffrey and Lorie had retreated to their bedroom after a long day. Angela lay upstairs, trying to find a moment of rest, unaware that the walls she trusted would soon echo with violence. Suddenly, the peace was shattered. A figure clad entirely in black approached the home with chilling precision. There were no attempts at stealthy entry, no picking of locks. Instead, the intruder lifted a hammer and swung it with deliberate force, shattering the living room window. The crash was deafening, a brutal announcement of the chaos to come. Michael's girlfriend woke in terror, her scream piercing the night as she scrambled for safety, escaping before she could be caught. Michael, however, confronted the intruder, a fatal mistake. Gunfire erupted. He was struck multiple times, desperate attempts to flee met with a merciless final shot to the head. The violence didn't stop there. Upstairs, Jeffrey and Lorie heard the gunshots and instinctively rushed toward the danger, only to encounter the cold, blooded precision of a killer's plan. Jeffrey fell near the front door, struck down before he could react. Lorie, seconds behind him, met the same fate on the staircase. In less than 5 minutes, the Kramers' home transformed from a haven into a scene of absolute horror. 3 lives extinguished, a family's heartbeat silenced, leaving only a trail of blood, shattered glass, and a chilling reminder that darkness can arrive unannounced, even in the quietest of suburbs. Angela's voice trembled as she clutched the phone, hiding in the corner of her room while the chaos unfolded below. "They're shooting," she whispered, each word barely carrying over the din of gunfire. "How many times?" The operator pressed gently urgency in their voice. 10 in the house," Angela murmured, her words punctuated by the terror in her chest. Outside, Anthony had managed to escape through the basement window, sprinting toward the distant flashing lights of approaching police, adrenaline and fear fueling every step. Inside the Kramer home, the scene was almost impossible to process. 40 caliber shell casings were scattered across the living room floor, gleaming dully under the harsh lights, each one a silent witness to the deadly precision of what had unfolded. Blood trailed like dark, viscous ink along the stairs and hallways, a macabre map tracing the path of terror, each splatter a grim reminder of lives extinguished in moments. The air was thick with the metallic tang of violence, and every corner of the house seemed frozen in a moment of chaos that defied logic. Yet amid the horror, there was a glaring absence. Drawers had not been rifled through. Jewelry, electronics, cash, everything remained untouched. No, this was not the work of opportunistic burglars. The scene spoke clearly. This was calculated, methodical, a deliberate assault executed with cold intent. Someone had entered this home not to steal, but to destroy. Investigators combed the rooms with meticulous care, photographing every angle, collecting evidence, and piecing together the story. The walls themselves seemed to whisper, but the most crucial pieces were not the shell casings or the bloodied carpets. They were the surviving witnesses. Angela Kramer, the middle child, had locked herself away in a closet, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Her hands shook, her breath came in ragged bursts, and yet, when the detectives knelt beside her, their questions precise and unflinching, she spoke without hesitation, and the name that cut through the tense, oppressive silence of the crime scene was one that would set the entire investigation in motion. Johnny Berizoff. Her voice, fragile yet resolute, echoed with a mixture of fear, grief, and certainty. To Angela, there was no question about who had orchestrated the nightmare that had ripped her family apart. And for the detectives listening, her words were the first real thread in the tangled web of deception, manipulation, and murder that would soon unravel before them. But the law and precaution could not account for the depths of Johnny's fury. Humiliation had festered into obsession. Rejection became a toxin he could not digest. And when the world refused to bend to his desires, he lashed out with a calculated cruelty that left devastation in its wake. As detectives began reconstructing the scene, tracing the trajectory of the bullets, examining the shattered glass, following the glistening blood along every surface, a terrifying pattern emerged. This was no act of impulsive rage. This was a crime of obsession, premeditated and executed with chilling precision. Every detail whispered the story of a man who had been consumed by resentment, a vendetta played out in a suburban home that had once been the very definition of ordinary. The Kramers' sanctuary, their haven of family dinners, laughter, and simple routines, had been annihilated in an instant. The people who had been their world, their children, their lives, their shared years were ripped away violently, leaving only silence and sorrow. Investigators saw beyond the physical devastation to the human toll. Grief so raw it could almost be touched, shock so deep it numbed the senses, and the haunting realization that some evils lie in wait, patient and calculating before striking without warning. In the aftermath, it became terrifyingly clear. The horror that had descended upon the Kramers was not a random misfortune, but a carefully orchestrated act of revenge. The normalcy of their lives had been obliterated, leaving a chilling void where love, laughter, and security had once lived. A void filled with the stark, undeniable truth that obsession can twist a person's mind into a weapon, and that sometimes the darkness outside the door is not waiting to knock, but to destroy everything in its path. But the case was far from closed. In fact, a new layer of impossibility began to take shape, one that would shake the very foundation of everything the Kramers and Angela had believed. Johnny's supposed guilt, the obvious target of suspicion, was suddenly undone by a single, irrefutable fact: an airtight alibi. Casino security footage placed him hundreds of miles away from the Kramer residence, bathed in the neon glow of slot machines, the constant clang of jackpots, and the relentless chatter of gamblers. From early evening until well past 4 a.m., Johnny's presence was undeniable. The timeline didn't just raise questions, it demolished any notion that he could have been the shooter. The evidence was unassailable. He could not have physically been there. Suddenly, the narrative everyone had clung to, the vengeful ex-lover, the predictable storm of a controlling man, crumbled under the weight of reality. Johnny, the presumed villain, was now officially innocent, at least in the execution of the murders. And if not him, then who? Who had orchestrated such precise, unrelenting violence, leaving no mark but terror in its wake? The question hovered over the investigation like a storm cloud, thick and unyielding. The breakthrough came in the form of cold, digital traces, phone records, strings of numbers, timestamps that refused to lie. Among the hundreds of calls and messages, one particular pattern demanded attention: repeated contact with a burner phone, anonymous yet insistent, linking the otherwise invisible threads of the case. And then, one message cut through the noise like a blade of voicemail, distorted and tense, left by a young man named Jacob. His voice trembled almost imperceptibly, but the words he spoke were sharp, deliberate, and suffused with a weight that made investigators pause. Here, buried in a tangle of technology and human behavior, was a clue that promised to unravel the mystery, not gently, but with the force of revelation. What had started as a seemingly straightforward tale of revenge had spiraled into something far more disturbing. A young man manipulated into committing unspeakable violence, leaving the Kramer family shattered and the investigators facing the horrifying truth that sometimes the hand that pulls the trigger belongs to someone entirely unexpected, manipulated, terrified, and completely under Johnny's influence. Jacob had agreed to carry out the murders. On March 2, 2010, he purchased a .40 caliber handgun, its cold weight a tangible link to the violence he was about to commit. Following Johnny's instructions to the letter, Jacob approached the Kramer home that night. Every step, every action was executed with chilling precision. By the time the chaos ended, Jeffrey, Lorie, and Michael were dead. Angela remained trapped upstairs, trembling and hiding, while Anthony had managed to escape to the basement and flee to safety. Jacob didn't linger. He fled south, heading toward Florida, paranoia gnawing at his mind with every mile. Law enforcement launched an intensive manhunt, tracing his movements, piecing together evidence from phone records, surveillance footage, and witness accounts. Eventually, they caught up to him. Under the weight of the evidence and the guilt, Jacob confessed in harrowing detail, exposing Johnny Berizoff as the true architect of the slaughter. The justice system moved swiftly. Johnny, the manipulative mastermind who had engineered the destruction from hundreds of miles away, was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. Jacob, the young man who had been molded into a weapon of vengeance, pleaded guilty and received 75 years for his role in the murders. Angela and Anthony survived, but the Kramers' world, their sense of safety, family, and innocence, was irrevocably shattered. The story of the Kramers stands as a grim warning how manipulation, obsession, and calculated cruelty can destroy lives in a single night. But this horror is far from unique. Less than 2 decades earlier, in 1996, another American family had endured a similarly unimaginable fate, the Mueller family in Tilly, Arkansas. That tragedy, like the Kramers, would reveal the darkest corners of human influence, obsession, and the terrifying consequences when vengeance is meticulously planned and executed. It's a reminder that evil often wears a mask of reason, preys on the vulnerable, and leaves devastation in its wake, an echo that lingers long after the headlines fade. The Kramers' story is not just one of loss, it's a testament to the fragility of life, the dangers of manipulation, and the haunting reality that sometimes the most ordinary nights can end in unimaginable horror. William and Nancy Mueller, along with their 8-year-old daughter Sarah, lived a life that on the surface seemed ordinary. A close-knit family in Tilly, Arkansas, devoted to one another, their home, and their passion for firearms. William, a licensed firearms dealer, took pride in his collection and the security it brought his family. Nancy balanced their household with care, while little Sarah brought laughter and light to their home. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, danger had already cast its shadow. In 1995, a man named Kirby Koo, a family acquaintance, had broken into their home, stealing weapons and cash, a chilling foreshadowing of the horrors that would follow. On January 11, 1996, the Muellers returned home unaware that their lives were about to be torn apart in a way that would shock even the most hardened investigators. 2 men posing as FBI agents lay in wait. With practiced cruelty, they restrained William, Nancy, and Sarah, interrogating them relentlessly about money and firearms. The terror escalated as the intruders tortured the family for information. Sarah, only 8 years old, endured electric shocks from a cattle prod until she revealed the location of $50,000 in cash hidden in her home. Investigators painstakingly pieced together the web of violence that had claimed the Mumweiler family. Stolen firearms led them down a trail of paint smears, fingerprints, and subtle forensic clues, each step revealing the terrifying reality. The killers were not random intruders, but men with intent, with ideology, and with a personal vendetta. Kirby Coe and his son, Chevy Coe, emerged as the orchestrators, bound together by a toxic blend of white supremacist beliefs and a hunger for revenge. Chevy, with a history riddled with violence, was more than capable of planning horrors that most could scarcely imagine. For months, father and son evaded capture, leaving behind a trail of shootouts, thefts, and chaos across multiple states until their eventual arrest in 1997. Every act, every step had been premeditated, fueled by a perverse sense of entitlement and a cold, ideological justification for murder. The Mueller murders, much like the tragic fate of the Kramers, underscore a chilling truth. The capacity for ordinary humans to be twisted into instruments of destruction is terrifyingly real. In mere minutes, a family's entire existence, years of love, laughter, and stability, can be obliterated, leaving survivors to navigate a world forever scarred by violence. These tragedies force us to confront uncomfortable, haunting questions. How does a seemingly normal life, filled with everyday routines and familial bonds, unravel so suddenly? What makes some individuals susceptible to manipulation, coercion, or ideological indoctrination? And perhaps the most disturbing inquiry of all, how do those who commit such acts reconcile their actions with themselves, convincing their minds that devastation, cruelty, and murder are justifiable? In the aftermath of these crimes, the echoes of terror linger far longer than the moments of violence. Families torn apart, communities shaken, and innocence lost all serve as stark reminders that danger can wear many faces, sometimes charismatic, sometimes familiar, sometimes terrifyingly ordinary. The stories of the Kramers and the Muellers are more than headlines. They are cautionary tales, illustrating how obsession, manipulation, and ideology can intersect to unleash horrors that defy comprehension. The fragility of safety, the vulnerability of trust, and the darkness lurking in human hearts become undeniable truths in the wake of such tragedies, leaving survivors and the world to grapple with the lingering question, could this happen again, and what must we do to prevent it? In both cases, the painstaking work of law enforcement was the only thing that turned chaos into comprehension. Surveillance footage captured fleeting shadows of movement, phone records mapped connections and timelines, and witness testimonies filled in the gaps that machines could not explain. Confessions, raw, reluctant, and chilling, provided the final puzzle pieces. In the Kramers' tragedy, it was Jacob Nodars' detailed recounting of his actions, manipulated and terrified, that exposed Johnny Berizoff as the calculating mastermind. Every instruction, every calculated step of terror, laid bare in the courtroom, revealed the terrifying power of influence and coercion. In the Muellers' case, investigators traced the meticulous planning of the Coes, uncovering how ideology, personal grievance, and a sense of twisted entitlement had guided their actions long before the first shot was fired. The murders were not spur of the moment. They were the culmination of planning, obsession, and calculated cruelty. But beyond the technical brilliance of the investigations lies the more haunting truth: human life is fragile, and safety can be an illusion. One evening, a family shares laughter over a birthday cake or cheers at a sports game. The next, that same home can erupt in chaos, leaving devastation where normalcy once reigned. Vulnerability can come from unexpected directions: a former lover, a trusted acquaintance, or the invisible grip of extremist ideology. Ordinary lives built on routine and love can be shattered in minutes by manipulation, rage, or fanaticism. The Kramers and the Muellers were not just victims of violent acts, they were victims of human susceptibility itself, of the ways fear, influence, and hatred can warp actions into incomprehensible cruelty. The unsettling parallels between the Kramers and the Muellers are impossible to ignore. In both cases, ordinary families lived ordinary lives, celebrating milestones, planning holidays, sharing moments that most would call mundane. Yet those everyday routines became the backdrop for extraordinary horror. Vulnerabilities, trust in loved ones, isolation, or exposure to persuasive manipulation were exploited with chilling efficiency. rage, obsession, and extremist ideologies became instruments of death. The attackers in both cases orchestrated violence with precision, leaving no room for chance, no margin for mercy. And for investigators, unraveling the threads of these tragedies required meticulous, almost forensic persistence, piecing together phone records, tracking movements, examining crime scenes, and interpreting confessions. The work demanded patience, skill, and an unflinching look at human cruelty. Ultimately, these stories are more than true crime chronicles. They are cautionary tales, reminders of the fragility of safety, the hidden consequences of unchecked obsession and hate, and the capacity for ordinary life to be violently disrupted. They reveal the terrifying spectrum of human behavior, from the manipulative to the ideologically driven, and leave an enduring question: how can one shield against the shadows that lie closer than anyone would ever want to believe? In the end, the Kramers and the Muellers remind us that while justice can punish, it can never fully repair the fractured remnants of lives shattered in an instant. From Darien, Illinois to Tilly, Arkansas, the stories of the Kramers and the Muellers serve as stark, haunting reminders. Ordinary lives can be shattered in mere minutes, leaving questions of human nature, morality, and the darkness in the hearts of perpetrators that remain difficult, if not impossible, to answer fully. These stories compel us to consider: how can we identify manipulative individuals before tragedy strikes? How can communities ensure the safety of families against threats that may come from inside their social circles? And most pressingly, how do the survivors rebuild when the people they love the most are taken violently from them, leaving behind nothing but grief, trauma, and memories of that night? The Kramer and Mueller families' lives were violently interrupted, but their stories persist, not only as cautionary tales, but as reminders of the need for vigilance, empathy, and awareness. The world may never fully understand why some individuals are capable of such calculated evil, but through careful investigation, justice, and storytelling, their actions are documented, their victims remembered, and the lessons they leave behind serve as a shield for others.